But Kelly, can I call on you next, please? We have Kelly Riddle from Clemson University Libraries. Her talk is Current and Possible Future States of Digital Preservation Workflows at Clemson Libraries. So please take it away.
Thank you so much. Are my slides coming through?
Yes, they are.
Awesome. Okay. Hi everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Kelly Riddle, and I'm the Director of Digitization and Digital Projects at Clemson University Libraries. I'd like to thank DPC for the opportunity to share about our digital preservation workflow. I'm really pleased to be included amongst such a large number of distinguished presenters at really model institutions. So I'm super pleased to be here. So the title of this presentation is Present and Possible Futures of Digital Preservation because we are in a time of transition, like a lot of other folks. So I will speak first about the libraries and where digitization services fits within them. I will talk about the content that's in our care and outline the workflow that we're currently using to deliver material into our digital preservation environment, as it were. I'll speak about a couple of recent internal assessments of our environment and the workflow modifications that we might implement to respond to some of the results of those assessments. And then I'll wrap up by kind of talking about some other next steps. And as a final disclaimer before I get rolling here, the call for presenters was open to workflows in all stages of development. So fair warning, this presentation is going to be describing a workflow that's definitely in the nascent stages of development. So feel free to tune out if, if this is too remedial for you. So Clemson University is a public land-grant university in South Carolina, a state in the southeastern United States. Its enrollment was 28,747 undergraduate and graduate students in the fall of 2023. We have about 1,600 faculty and recently received Carnegie R1 classification. We have one main campus in the upstate of South Carolina. The university has a small satellite campus in a nearby city, several other sort of offices in different parts of the state, and operates a cooperative extension service. That extension service is typical of a land-grant university like Clemson, as is Clemson's strong STEM-based curriculum. The university libraries operates a main library, Cooper Library, which is on campus, the main campus, and it also has 3 branches on the campus: Special Collections and Archives, an Education Media Center, and our Architecture Library. We also have an offsite storage location, the Library Depot, which is where our digitization lab is housed. I also want to point out that the university's Historic Properties Division is under the aegis of the libraries. It operates a number of small museums around the area. And also within the libraries is the Clemson University Press, which is home to our institutional repository. Clemson Libraries is not a DPC member, but we are an NDSA member. A little bit about digitization services. So we perform high quality cultural heritage digitization of 2D materials for partners both within and outside the libraries and the university. Our current workflows and equipment are capable of FADGI 3-star certification for reflective and transparent materials. And I've put together a little abbreviated timeline of the unit here. So the libraries began imaging rare and unique material in 2007. Out of the Library Office of Technology, Library Technology, essentially, our IT division. And I took the role of director in September of last year, so I'm still getting to know the collections. As the director, I'm responsible for the digital imaging program, our digitalization lab, coordinating our workflows, creating access points, and caring for the assets that we generate. A couple of other key dates that are going to be relevant to the workflow. The Synology rack stations, where we store our digital assets, and which I'll talk about in more detail shortly, were brought online in 2016, as was our current public-facing digital collections site, which is a homegrown system that uses WordPress as a front end. Also, there was an administrative move that the libraries made in 2022 to move digitization services out from the Office of Library Technology, or Digital Strategies, it was renamed, into the Division of Collections and Discovery. So this has co-located digitization services in the same administrative division as the metadata unit, acquisitions, collection strategies, special collections and archives, and records management. So with that context, let's talk about the content. So the vast majority of the material that we are responsible for is a result of digital imaging workflows in our lab. So special collections and archives has their own sort of digital infrastructure. And I can talk about that at the end, where sort of born digital records and all that sort of thing fit in. But we are responsible for digitized material. We, of course, field regular requests for sort of one-offs, but I want to highlight 4 significant sort of programmatic collections that make up the majority of the content in our care. So the first is digitized image and manuscript materials from Clemson Special Collections and Archives. This is sort of our reason for being. We also have had an ongoing partnership with the National Park Service since 2010 to digitize historical materials from national parks across the country. So this Open Parks Network material makes up a significant portion of the primary archival files that we managed. Several years ago, the unit undertook a project that digitized all of our institution's theses and dissertations from about 1932 until the institution stopped printing them in 2006. Those are accessed in Clemson Open, our institutional repository, rather than the regular digital collection site, but we manage the primary files. And then finally, Clemson's Digital Imaging Lab serves as the primary digitization servicer for partners of the South Carolina Digital Library in our area of the state. So SCDL is a digital collections aggregator that serves all of South Carolina and is a DPLA service hub. And Clemson provides digitization services for libraries, archives, and museums in our geographic area of the state that don't have the equipment or staff or other capacity to digitize their own materials. So after those projects are completed, we continue to hold the digital assets that are generated by those projects. And then as far as the age of our materials, we have been digitizing and generating assets since 2007, so almost 20 years. And our current storage infrastructure was brought online in 2016. As far as the amount of material in our care, I've put a breakdown from a very recent inventory here. So you can see that the vast majority of the materials, as you might expect, 46% are TIFFs. JPEGs make up about 28% of our files, PDFs are 11%, and a quite large smattering of other file types make up about 15%. So I listed a couple of the other file types here in case of interest. I just ran this inventory, so I have not been able to investigate, for example, where these audio and video files came from. And there are a bunch of file types that I don't think are valid file types, so I'm interested to kind of dig into that inventory in the coming weeks. But what this means is that we are managing about 3 million total files, and altogether about 64 terabytes of material. So, in the grand scheme of things, especially compared to a lot of other institutions that are presenting at these webinars, not so much material, but enough to be getting on with. So our current workflow begins with the production of locally imaged material. So this material might be created using a variety of equipment. We have a couple of digital transitions cameras. We have some DSLR setups. We have some old school Epson flatbed scanners, but no matter the source, once the images are produced on a local machine, we produce 2 kinds of assets: archival primary files or master files. We have taken the primary files as our parlance, and production files, and both of those are typically TIFFs. So we have quite a collaborative workflow within the digitization lab. So those files are generated locally and then immediately moved to a couple of places. So production files are moved to a shared working drive, which is a partition on a dedicated Synology rack station where they can undergo quality control and post-processing. So this is a semi-automated process that's done at the point of digitization. So for example, we will run an export from Capture One that sends files to both locations with varying specifications. Archival primary files are moved to the other partition of that drive, which is called Lab Masters. So Lab Masters is where our archival primary files live, and this is the body of material that we've targeted for digitization, for preservation, excuse me. And everyone in the lab, including students, has access to the working drive, while only lab staff have access to Lab Masters. So once we've performed quality control and any other post-processing on the production files and a project is complete, the production files join their corresponding archival primary files in the correct directory in Lab Masters, along with any other relevant derivative files that are generated during that process that we want to keep around. And I make that transfer myself. Rack Station A, where both of those partitions live, is periodically replicated by an automated process using rsync. So that detects and syncs changes to a separate Rack Station B. Both Rack Station A and Rack Station B are housed in Cooper Library. I think they're right. I haven't seen them, but I think they're right next to each other. So finally, currently very periodically, I upload new materials to an Amazon S3 Glacier instance. However, this is also a manual process and it does not happen automatically. So our Glacier materials currently and often do not match our version of record in Lab Masters. So right off the bat, you'll notice that there are several things here that could be improved. So for example, you'll notice that I didn't mention anything about metadata. So our groups of files don't currently include any sort of metadata separate from the objects. It's just the image files. So descriptive metadata for digitized content at Clemson is created by our colleagues in our library's metadata unit. Using an application called Collective Access. So the metadata unit uses Collective Access to apply metadata via a graphical user interface, and which allows them to manage the metadata elements and authority control across collections. So a typical ingest from our public-facing digital collections platform involves an export of a metadata file from Collective Access. But those files typically have not gone into the managed project directory alongside the images for long-term storage or preservation. You'll also notice that our original diagram does not include any administrative assets for digitization projects. So documents like project charters, individual project guidelines, decision logs, are managed in a combination of Google Drive and the Box file sharing application. So, and documents like publishing permission forms for theses and dissertations, quite critical, are also stored in Box and not alongside the assets that they correspond with. So if just a cursory glance tells us that things can be improved. I'm new to the position and I thought it would be useful to do a couple of formal assessments to help solidify high priority action items and kind of chart a path forward. So I'll briefly cover those assessments and their results here. I used both the DPC Rapid Assessment Model and the National Digital Stewardship Alliance's levels of digital preservation. So again, the purpose of these assessments was to just quickly identify some actions that we could take to build on our current processes and make our digital preservation as they are activities more robust and reliable. So I'll start with the DPC Rapid Assessment Model and then cover the NDSA levels. So, and if folks from DPC feel compelled to break in here and correct any misapprehensions, that's more than welcome. So the rapid assessment model, according to DPC, is a digital preservation maturity modeling tool that has been designed to enable rapid benchmarking of an organization's digital preservation capability and facilitate continuous improvement over time, which is exactly what we need. And it's divided into two areas of capabilities: organizational capabilities, which are displayed on the left, and service capabilities, which are displayed here on the right. So I rated Clemson Libraries and digitization services in each capability, and you can see a snapshot of those results here. So the scale ranges from 0, meaning the entity being reviewed has minimal awareness of the components and purpose of each capability, to 4, level 4, optimized. And levels 2 through 4 have sort of examples of specific components that can serve as evidence of having achieved that level. And you can see that we are, for example, fortunate to have quite a robust IT capability compared to at least our other capabilities, but we obviously have a long way to go in terms of policy and strategy. You can also see when you look at our service capabilities that in digitization services specifically, we are aware of the various capabilities and their importance, but that our current workflows and infrastructure do not satisfy even the basic level in 4 out of 5 areas. So for another lens on the situation, I also evaluated our digital preservation stance using the NDSA levels. So this provides kind of a little more granular look at specific processes. And this is what informed a lot of the possible several of the possible changes in the workflow that you'll see in just a minute. So the NDSA levels version 2.0 outlines 5 functional areas of digital preservation: storage, integrity, control, metadata, and content, and 4 possible levels of adherence to standards in each area. So if you look at our results, those little orange things are X's, meaning that we do not satisfy the criterion. And we have one little green check mark because we do now have an inventory. But you can see that this paints a similar picture of our digital preservation situation and digitization services. And our current target levels in 4 out of the 5 functional areas are, with level 1, the lowest level. So I took a look at the criteria in each area and identified some possible action items. For example, have 2 copies in separate locations. We don't technically have that right now. So kind of what can we do to quickly achieve that? And what does that mean for the workflow? So here is a possible sort of next iteration of our workflow based on these 2 assessments. And so this is, kind of just a possibility. So if folks with experience take a look at this and say, oh, that's not going to work, then, or you have programs or processes that you like that can enable some of these actions, I would love to hear from you. But the first change you can see are these 2 different kinds of activities, which is generating integrity information. We're not currently generating checksums for anything, so we can generate integrity information upon creation of materials, and then monitoring assets in their respective storage locations. You'll also notice that object metadata and administrative project materials, I would like to add those to the project files for management alongside the assets. I'd also like to automate where possible. So you'll notice that the replication process from Rack Station A to our Glacier vaults becomes automated in this version of the workflow, so that I don't have to sit at a workstation and move files and folders myself. And then finally, the monitoring activities will produce updated inventories and integrity information. And so we'll store that information alongside the assets, but also with other administrative materials in Box or Google Drive. So by and large, our kind of bare bones infrastructure stays the same, but adding a couple of actions, sort of low ask actions to satisfy some of the competencies that came up in the assessments will go a long way to sort of bringing us up to at least a minimal sort of, yes, we're working towards digital preservation. So I'll wrap up with some next steps. A process that's already underway is the sharing out of the results of the assessments and the current workflow and, what the a possible future workflow might look like. So we have a number of partners in the libraries that enable digitization services to function, IT, obviously, but also metadata, special collections and archives for their materials, which are significant. So it's important that we share the results to ensure that my assessment is accurate, and that the proposed solutions are effective and efficient. More eyes are always better. So that process is underway right now. We're also planning to convene a cross-functional team in the library. So while digitization services is responsible for the library's digitized assets, we're not the only libraries unit with digital preservation needs, obviously. So special collections and archives is in the process of hiring a digital collections archivist who's going to work with their born digital collections. So it makes sense for our organization to sort of pool those resources to plan efficient workflows and infrastructure. And since we are the unit that has, most of this assets that need to be preserved at this point, sort of makes sense to work together. And so while preservation is not going to be the only thing that this cross-functional team works on, it's going to be a key piece since our workflows do and increasingly will cross functional units. A piece of low-hanging fruit is that we are planning to relocate one of the rack stations from Cooper to the library depot. So while the library depot is only about 6 miles from campus, it will provide a little peace of mind to have that server here and not next to the backup server here instead of next to the other server in the same room. We'll also work to if after the sort of feedback process, we'll work to implement a couple of those lightweight processes. So I've already generated an inventory of assets. I'm looking forward to digging into that and get on a schedule to sort of produce updated inventories regularly. We will outline a process and tools for generating fixity information, and we'll add that to the workflow. We will, for example, document the entities and people who are able to access our content and bring that in line with who should be accessing our content. So kind of following up on those individual action items blow by blow in those assessments. And then finally, I want to keep in mind that we're building a workflow that we can kind of continue to iterate on as we grow. So the digitization lab has so far not dealt with audio or video digitization, for example, but that is something that does make sense to support in the future. We also hope to bring on new partners in the libraries and beyond, historic properties. And so something like a vast increase in the amount of material that we're responsible for if we start handling audio and video content, we may have to blow up our workflow then anyway, but I'd like to think that if we approach adapting our current workflow to be more effective, more efficient, more collaborative, that it will be a bit easier to scale. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions and any feedback that you would care to give. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. And if everyone would please like to give Kelly a virtual round of applause, I would appreciate